Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and good evening for all the people joining us from Canada and North America, I would say, and early in the morning for Europe, Egypt. Good day. Just welcome everybody. Welcome here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Shonal Agarwal, Director of Chapters International, and it's my great honor to be hosting this launch for the new book of Kath Murdoch, Getting Personal with Inquiry. Kath, just brings me back to when your last book, The Power of Inquiry, and we had in-person workshops, and I was just so busy selling those books. I still remember that. And I have to say, I've got many emails coming to say, am I selling this one as well? But I am not going to take too much of your time. I just have to welcome Kimberly and Trevor and Kath for this lovely fireside chat. And I'm just going to hand this over to Kath. Thank you, Kath. And Kimberly and Trevor.
Thank you, Shonal. And Shonal, we'd be remiss if we didn't thank you for hosting us, such a dear friend and colleague and collaborator, and to create some amazing space for us to celebrate and have another one of our fireside chats. So Chapters International, Shonal, thank you. And friends, welcome. For those of you who haven't attended one of our previous fireside chats, they are just a really intimate, fun, safe place to talk about inquiry, where we tend to just bounce questions and ideas off one another and just see where the conversation goes. This particular fireside chat, though, is a little different, as you can see with our backgrounds, our virtual backgrounds. We're here to launch Kath, your most recent book, and it's kind of redundant to have it here in front of me and also up there in the corner, but I actually have two in front of me. This is so exciting. And as you can see, mine has all the little Post-its. I know Kimberly, yours does too. And, we're here to talk about it, and we're here to share it, and we're here to celebrate it, and then we're here to get it out into the world. So actually in this conversation, we're going to get a link out. So people, if you're interested in buying it right away, you can find it during this chat, which is really exciting. Kath, tell us about this book. What is this book about? And don't just simply say inquiry, because of course it's about so much more than that. But please, let us know.
Oh, thank you, Trevor. And I'm couldn't think of better company to launch my latest book. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's joined us. So the essence of Getting Personal with Inquiry Learning is that it's about getting personal with inquiry learning. It's all in the title. Essentially, this is a book to support teachers in how to nurture young people's interests, passions, questions, curiosities, and use those as a vehicle for them to learn through a process of inquiry. In some ways, I think of this as, for any of you that are familiar with the power of inquiry, and there is one chapter in the power of inquiry. I think I even called that chapter something like Getting Personal. It was one chapter about this aspect of our work as inquiry-based teachers. This book is that chapter on steroids. It's the best way I can describe it. So, of course, in order for it to work as a text, there is some general thinking and information and advice on inquiry in general, but the bulk of the book is about supporting not necessarily individuals, but certainly personalising this process more strongly than in any other of the books that I've written.
Kath, congratulations. I am so happy to be here with you at the launch of this book. And even though I couldn't manage to figure out my virtual background, it is right here. I just put it over my shoulder. I adore you. I'm sorry I couldn't get my act together enough to figure that out. And but I would love to just start us off by asking, you've written so many books about inquiry-based learning. You're prolific. You just published a book, Winsome.
I know. It was my little passion project, that one.
And it's a great one. I'm just really curious, why this book and why now?
Okay, so it's interesting. I was actually thinking about this the other day and thinking back over the books that I've written and co-written over my years in education. And the first few books that some of you will be too young to even know about, those books were essentially collections of, for want of a better word, collections of units that I had either worked on with children or with other teachers. And it was like, here's some exemplary units that you can take and modify. And there was choice within them and so on. But I think back then it was, here are some inquiries that you can use. And then the few books after that were books that were about the process, the cycle of inquiry, and the techniques and strategies that you can use as you bounce your way around the cycle of inquiry. And then by the time I got to the power of inquiry, I think my understanding, my research, my experience had grown to the point where I really did see this as a whole school. So we were a community of inquirers, and that this was much bigger than simply units. And that book was really looking at this as a stance, as a whole school approach. And then I think the evolution from that to say, okay, if we're on this journey together, but what if children were not only encouraged to inquire into the big ideas that we might bring to them, what if they got to have even more agency in this approach? And I could see it starting to happen. So I think the book was a response to our growing understanding of the importance of personalising learning for children and what profound learning happens when we get to do that. And you know, the other little piece in the why this book, why now, is even though my children are well out of school now, I think particularly in secondary school, watching what happened when my own children were on the far too rare occasion when someone saw their light, saw their passions, their interests. Someone in a school saw that, a teacher saw that, and helped them grow it or use it in some way, and the profound impact that has on young people when they are truly seen and when those passions and strengths are nurtured. So I think there was a part of this book came from my experience as a parent as much as an educator. So there you go. That's a long answer, Kimberly, but that's why this book and why now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could tell that your own children, your girls, were a big part of this. There's a lot of part in this. There's a dedication to a teacher. There's a lot of new things that you brought into this book. And I keep thinking it's just full of heart. It's a very personal book. It feels like a very personal book. And Trevor and I have both talked about how, in working with older students in inquiry, how relatable this and useful this book is. So I'm sure we'll get into that, but it really is, profound, especially in secondary school, how we just limit the amount of time that young adults have to pursue their passions. They're so scheduled out. They're so maxed out.
And then they lose sight of their passions. Don't you think? So it's not just that we don't give them time, it's that by not giving them that time, they lose a sense of, well, what is it that drives me? Who am I? What are my strengths? So it's giving time, but it's also actively nurturing them. And I think we really owe it to young people to make sure there's no reason why we can't do that in schools.
Yeah. Kimberly, I read the book, of course, with particular bias, so you'll have to forgive me, but as a high school practitioner, I was reading this from my day job, that the students I serve, the school I walk to every day. And, Kath, on page 38, you talk about an example of flow of personal inquiry across grade levels, from the youngest years to kind of later elementary years. And I know you pause there, but you didn't have to. The rest of the book is so applicable. And Kimberly and I, we were talking about this before the session, just Kimberly, in your context, you're using frames from the book with your post-secondary, your university students, aren't you?
All the time. Especially, the question stems that, okay, I'm just going to jump right into this. Trevor, sorry,
Okay.
I'm hogging the questions right now, but
I'll have my turn.
There are so many, I don't do this very often. There's so many bookmark pages, and there's this one page where you have question stems to elicit, further discovery, to get students thinking anew. And I bookmarked that, and I wrote down, this is what should be used in my marriage, in my conversation with my own children. And they're brilliant. And I have my favorites that I rely on in the classroom and at home to get people to talk more and to expand their thinking. And as I read, it's a full page of questions, all of them really good. I tend to default to the same ones over and over again. Here, my favorites are, tell me more.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Yeah.
And what are you going to do next? And then I forget, and then I kind of stop. And then I'm like, well, it's kind of my shtick. How do you, what are some tricks that you've used over the years to really mix it up with your questions?
Even though this is my bread and butter, and I've been doing this work for a really long time, I would say I still have to think ahead. So this is particularly relevant to the conferring work that we do in a personal inquiry piece, where you're conferring the whole way through the process, but particularly in the early phase. And I'm thinking now of children sort of from about year 2 on, in that early phase where you're trying to establish, okay, what is it that you're interested in pursuing? How can I help you with that? I want to set you up to a degree to succeed. So I need to help you with your thinking. And then, of course, we're conferring throughout the process. But I think what I try to do is think about the questions ahead of time. And I'm often sharing with my teacher colleagues the importance of doing that. Sometimes just by talking about what are some of the questions that we could ask, jotting them down. I may never look at that again, but just the fact that I've given a little bit of time to it, and I still do it. As you know, I do a lot of learning labs, so a lot of demonstration teaching. The one thing that I make sure that I prepare in advance is a moment to go, what are the questions that I think might help with this conversation? Because like you, Kimberly, it's easy to default to my favorites. But I think that, and I do know teachers too that have got, if they're, I'm in a different space every day, but if you're in the same space, actually having them up on the wall somewhere, because they're also questions that the children can use with each other. They're not just ours. And one of the pieces in this whole approach is inviting students to support each other in figuring out whether the path that they are on is going to be a worthwhile use of their time. It can't all rest with the teacher to support that. So I think building a shared repertoire of questions that work, sharing them with the students really explicitly is another way too of making sure we remember them.
Yeah, thank you. Super helpful.
Yeah. Well, and we can always add to our question repertoire, can't we? And I love to think about, that keeping the questions visible in the classroom, so we catch students using them unprompted because they're there, they see them. I'm really struck, Kath, about how this book just isn't about personal inquiry, though. It's in the title, and you said it's chapter 7 of your previous book on steroids. But certainly you don't propose that we can pick up this book and jump to part 3 of the book right away. In fact, there's a part 1 and part 2. And I really was taken with part 2, this notion of what is the culture of inquiry? What is what are the roots of personal inquiry, so to speak? How do we cultivate the conditions for personal inquiry to be successful, where our students feel not just curious and engaged, but competent? I think that's a key piece that I really took away from part 2 of the book, is how do we help our students be competent inquirers? And so I was really hoping you could shed light on part 2 a little bit. What does it mean to create a culture of inquiry a little? And or just even broadly, what is the importance of part 2 of this book for us all before we get to the beauty of part 3?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for picking up that too. I mean, when I was actually just looking through the book here to see, it's not quite half of the book, but almost. So there's part 1 and 2. It's a bit hard with the virtual background. There's part 3 and 4, and part 1 and 2 really do set the scene. So one of the reasons that something like a personalized opportunity for inquiry and learning in general falls apart is that there can be this sense of, well, that sounds great. What a cool idea. Let's give our kids on Thursday afternoon, they can choose their topics and go for it. And then it becomes this incredibly shallow, often a bit of time wasting, cute little projects on ponies. There's no depth, there's no rigor. It's the sort of thing that you certainly don't need any support with, and it's shallow and problematic. Now, I really have tried hard in the book to say that this approach can be some of the deepest teaching and learning experiences that you'll ever have. But in order for that to be the case, we need to slow down and first ask ourselves, and I've got a page that is headed, "Are you ready for this?" And where you can actually
love that page. I love that page.
Take yourself through it and don't jump into that deep end if you haven't learned to swim. That you're not going to just get it. You're actually going to need to pace yourself and work through and ask yourself some critical questions as a school. So what I've tried to do in the first section is go over some big picture stuff about inquiry, but I think that section 2 that you're talking about, I've just called it laying the foundations. And and she says going to the section because she can't quite remember the exact
this page,
elements.
Kath,
There we
this
go.
page.
I've got it.
It's so good.
Yeah. Oh, are we ready for this? Yeah. But I'm nervous that people will read through that and go, we'll get to the end and go, actually, no. But if the answer is no, then that's what chapter 2 is about. So basically, I've just shared stuff that, this isn't the first. This has been written about in many other contexts by many other people in my own work and beyond, but where we think about what is our whole school culture? What is it that we as a school stand by? I was at one of my wonderful partner schools a couple of weeks ago in Brisbane, Graceville Primary School. And, last year, all virtually, we worked on what are the principles that this school stands by. How do we articulate them? And because we value this is the principle. And because we have this guiding principle, these are the practices that you'll see, and this is what you won't see. And it's so clear. I was at the school, it's up on the walls. You can see this is what this school stands for. It's really clear. So do we have as a school a really clear sense of our values, and do those values support this? So we've got lots of schools out there saying we value agency. If you really value agency, where is it? Where do we actually do it? And so there's the values, there's what do we believe and understand? What are the assumptions that we have about children? And what are the assumptions and how do we see children? How do we see ourselves? And that takes, as everyone here knows, that takes some fairly challenging self-reflection for some of us. So there's that piece. There's nurturing agency as a whole school, not just for the children, but for the teachers as well. When I interviewed Sam Sherritt as a part of the research for this book, so I interviewed a whole bunch of people as part of the research, and Sam talked a lot about the need for a culture of permission for not just for students but for staff, and leaders that were prepared to nurture and value agency for their staff, and how important that was. So I've got a section on that, and then a couple of other things around the curation of the space, the importance of materials, the way that we design spaces for learning, the actual pedagogy. So in between The Power of Inquiry and this book, as well as Winsome, I've also published the Art of Inquiry resource, which are the 10 cards, the 10 pedagogical practices. So I think that piece is another get ready for it by thinking about, how do you teach? If we teach in a way that positions children as passive, compliant learners that are the ones answering the questions rather asking them, if that's our dominant modus operandi, don't try something like this, where and then turn around and say, wow, the kids they're just not asking any questions. Of course they're not. So it has to be this consistent pedagogy. And then the final piece that I spend quite a bit of time on, again, this isn't new material, this is just my spin on it, is the importance of developing a whole school language and approach to building what Guy Claxton describes as growing learning muscles, whether it's habits of mind, whether it's the PYP approaches to learning, learner profile, whether it's James Nottingham's work with the learning pit, whatever language and approach you use, having some consistent and embedded language to think and talk about learning itself. Do our children see themselves as capable learners with a toolkit of strategies? This approach will help build that, but this approach also depends on it. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. So that beautiful. Whole chapter is about that. And it might be that that's all you work on. And then down the track, you'd say, okay, now we're ready.
I really want to highlight that I feel like part 2, Kath, you so softly lead us through those hard questions. Like you were talking about what are our values as a culture at a school, and those are hard conversations to have. But you know, just looking at the "Are we ready for this?" list of questions, those are questions that we could all bring into these spaces that sometimes feel really tense and awkward and uncomfortable. But in a way, honestly, Kath, that only you can, you softly walk your readers through some of these hard conversations. And I left part 2 feeling like I was ready for part 3, not just because there was values alignment with my practice and what you're proposing, but I could see myself engaging in some hard conversations with schools I support using a lot of part 2. So I just felt so taken care of. Kimberly, you must have felt the same way, right?
Yes, and I was really impressed, Kath, that you don't just invite us by asking us the questions, but you actually answer them for yourself and share that with us. So for example, when you say the beliefs that underpin inquiry, we need to answer those questions for ourselves. And so, Trevor, it might take us a whole school year before we're even ready. And I just want to read some of these just for the people who are joining us. And just, if you could there are lots of people on this call, just think for a moment the last time you've answered these questions for yourselves. Here's just a couple of them. What relationship do I have with the curriculum? What do I really understand about how learning happens? Here's my favorite. What do I think school is for? When we ask those questions, those are profound, right? And they probably change over time. So you have to keep asking them among your staff. But I mean, I circled that one because And then here's the brave thing that you did is you actually answered those in your book, which is something I think I would sidestep and say, well, good luck, everyone, answering those. It's scary
Or
to put
answering
it
them in terms of this is, if from my perspective, here's how I would answer them. Here's mine. And that, so if people are looking for language to sort of attach to their values, yes, obviously I'm not saying everyone has to believe this, but I have to put my money where my mouth is. I have to say, I'm going to lay my cards on the table. Here's the underpinning belief system for this work that is a personal belief, but not a belief that I've just pulled out of thin air. Make no mistake. Also very much based in a lot of experience and research. So I think that's important to say. It's not just all about here's what I think.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't come off that way at all. It's brave because it's where you are right now, given all that you know, and your willingness to put it out there is an act, I think, of real vulnerability and courage.
Thank you.
Especially if you have, do we want to talk about like what people, the misconceptions of inquiry and when, because that is a whole section you addressed that I thought was really quite good.
I was so thankful for that section. That was so, and I was just nodding my head in how Kath presented both sides of the coin, didn't she, Kimberly?
Yes. It's not full on cheerleading for inquiry. It's also a very clear-eyed look at what you give and what you give up, perhaps. My favorite section there, I have a lot of favorite sections, but another one is the chart where you have what inquiry is and what it is not. And the reason there's one part that really caught my eye. Inquiry is organized, not, listen to this word, everyone, shambolic. I had to look that up. That's a beautiful, that means chaotic. Great. Yeah. Inquiry is organized, not shambolic. Inquiry is enhanced by connection with others, okay? Not carried out in isolation. Or not always carried out in isolation, right? Especially when you think of personal inquiry. Do you want to say more about that, or?
I definitely want to say more about that one, because I think that is, and it's something that took me a little while to really articulate, and I so hope that it comes across, is that while I'm talking about personal, I don't mean always individual. Right. So, and a few really powerful conversations helped me refine my thinking about this. Nellie Gibson, who is a teacher that I feature in this book, I had a really great interview with her, and she works in the early years, and I've spent time in her learning spaces. And for Nellie, what she loves to see is when a personal interest of a very young child, she describes it as it catches, that certain things catch and other children are drawn to that, and then this project emerges with a small group. But it's so personal is authentically connecting with the individual, and in many ways we should say that all the work we do should be personal in that regard. But I think this idea that if it's personal, it's every single child doing their own thing, it might be, but it might also be small groups of students that are working together. I must say that in some of the expressions or the way that schools organise to do this, so it's important to say there's no one approach to this, and I try and show different ways that we can accommodate and design structures to support more personal inquiry. So one of the models that is a common one in some of my partner schools that we use is we actually dedicate some workshop time to it. So we'll have a weekly workshop that is devoted to this work, and that'll sit alongside what I call the shared inquiry. So perhaps for some of you, the units of inquiry. And I must say that in those personal inquiry workshops, most oftentimes children are working on their own thing, but their collaboration is still incredibly strong. They're helping each other out. They're saying, actually, I think you've looked at this before. Can you help me with that? Or can you show me how you did this in your last project, or whatever it might be? So it definitely isn't each child doing their own thing completely devoid of collaboration. As in fact, Yong Zhao, who I was so blessed to have write the foreword, he remarks that in this strength-based approach, this personalised approach, we actually enhance a sense of belonging because our individual strengths and interests are recognised. And when you feel that as a learner, when you feel seen, and when you not only feel seen, but you feel valued because of the things that you are interested in, knowledgeable about, and good at, and others are drawing on that, you're part of the group. You feel worthwhile. So this lovely dance between the individual and the collective, I think, is one of the reasons behind this. But it's certainly a misconception that this means every child chooses their own thing and there's no collaboration. It's the opposite of that in many ways. But yes, I mean, the reason that, just very quickly, the reason that I did decide to devote quite a significant amount of time in the first part of this book to the question, why use an inquiry-based approach, but then the question, why not, is to address the criticisms, to remind us that within the criticisms, there are always truths, and that we can learn from. Some of the criticisms are really valid. And, you know, in his recent book, Guy Claxton had this lovely term where he talked about the shadow side of the dispositions that he promotes. You know, that the shadow side of even the shadow side of agency is a sense of entitlement, isn't it? You know, that there are shadow sides to inquiry. And so I wanted to address those because we need to be aware of them. And the other reason I wrote that section is that and those of you that have been familiar with various things I've posted, is that I think it's all too easy to buy into what I think is a really false dichotomy about over here there's explicit instruction and over here there's inquiry-based learning. Now, whenever someone says to me things like, I just love the idea of inquiry-based learning, I think it's really great, but I almost always know that they're about to say, but it's really important that we teach children that some things just have to be taught explicitly. And my response is, what's not explicit? What do you mean by explicit? What does that actually mean? When I do learning labs, so often the first things that the teachers will say afterwards is, wow, you're so explicit in your teaching, i.e., the students know why they're doing what they're doing. There's no secret teacher's business. We construct everything together. We're all on the same page. It's as explicit as it can be. So we confuse the word explicit with direct teaching. And even that, I don't have to put direct teaching over here and inquiry over here. They do not have to be at odds. Rather, it's a matter of emphasis. So direct teaching is in that telling, explaining, telling, modeling, demonstrating. That's in my repertoire. It's in all of our repertoire. It's just not my go-to. It's not my mate. So I try to, it's there when I need it at the point of need, right? So I try to have a third way of thinking about it. So it's not either this or this. It's, you know, that field beyond quote, you know, between right and wrong is the field beyond. I'll meet you there. Yeah. And that's the place I want to meet. I'm not interested in this politicized, extreme, this versus this conversation. Doesn't interest me. And I just try and deal with it as best I can in this book.
Well, and you have, Kath, you know, it's you were referencing the shadow side, and I turned to page 32, and you do this so many times in the first two parts. You do this little split screen, this the columned approach. And in this column and in this table, it's benefits of inquiry and shadow side of inquiry. And I think we've all, had those moments where, I could have been more explicit in rolling this out, or I could have facilitated or coached or modeled, or maybe I could have stepped aside maybe a little earlier, or maybe I stepped in too soon. And I think when I read that shadow side column, I thought, ooh, I have done all of that at one point or another in my career. And it made me feel good. It made me feel really good to see everything there. And then, as you were sharing, Kath, I couldn't help but think of another page, which was what the learner needs and what the educator needs, another split screen table. And you talk about these conditions, but also values and dispositions and understandings that the learner needs to be successful with agency and inquiry. And so many of them parallel what the educator needs. And I think of,
that's right.
I know Judy Albert's in the room. Hi, Judy, from Vancouver. And Judy and Linda's work sheds light on, inquiry is not just what we want for kiddos. How do we engage in inquiry for teachers and adults? And you're very, very clear in making those parallelisms in that table, weren't you? Could you speak to that for us, the importance of both?
I think I think if we talk about schools as communities of inquiry, then that means we all learners in that community see themselves as inquirers. And of course, that goes to a long history of understanding what it means to teach as an act of research. So to take that, the Reggio Emilia philosophy of teacher as researcher in the room. So asking ourselves constantly, what is it through the pedagogy of listening and observing? What is it that I am coming to understand? And based on what I am observing and listening to, where to next, this brings an inquiry stance to our work as we even get, and so many of you that are on this call would be doing this as we come to our planning meetings. I remember the days of having planning meetings where we'd come together to plan and there wasn't one piece of evidence of student learning at the table. I think of that now and I think, how bizarre that we got together to say, what will we do next, without saying, let's look at what's happening. It was like we've ticked off that activity, what's the next one? So I think bringing that whole spirit and stance and way of being as a community of inquirers, and understanding that we are inquiring as teachers. So as I confer with individuals, I'm inviting the child to think. It's this lovely sort of, you think of the inquiry happening. I think there's a diagram in there of the inquiry happening for the learner. And then while the learner is inquiring, outside that or around that, the teacher is inquiring. So we're supporting the child into where to next for their learning. And we're thinking, and what is it that I or we as educators need to do next to support you to go further? And that starts to infuse our way of being, our language, our body language, our way of being in the classroom. If we see ourselves as inquirers, Ron Richard says in his work too, if our children don't see us as learners, we have a problem. We're not going to cultivate a culture of true thinking if we've got that power differential wrong. So yeah, I think it's a really fascinating piece, and many of the schools that I feature in this book have, for example, a process in place where each teacher has a professional personal inquiry that they're engaged in through the year. This is common practice in schools in New Zealand, for example. And so you are living the inquiry process as a professional, as well as supporting it in your students.
Kath, you mentioned body language, and I'm just watching you with a smile on my face because your hands dance, and
my hands drive me crazy.
And I'm sure, no, it's great. And and it's probably not lost on anyone that you managed to find a shirt that matches your book cover. And I don't know how did you find that the perfect teal, but you did. And to me, you've always had a sharp eye for aesthetics. We know that from the way The Power of Inquiry was produced, that the physical design of a book is important to you.
It is.
So could you share a little with us about the way the book is designed and organized and why you did that?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for noticing, not just the shirt, which was just an accidental purchase, but I thought, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do it. I thought it might be a bit much, but anyway, it's here.
Great.
But yeah, look, so cards on the table. My brother, Graham, is an incredible graphic designer, and he designed all of The Power of Inquiry. And when I published that book, as well as people being lovely about the content, overwhelmingly people loved the look of it. And we all know that. I mean, some of you might have, for example, some of you might have recently bought Brené Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart. And I listened to it, and then I was so thrilled with it. I bought it, and it's the most beautiful object as a book. So not only do you get this gorgeous content, there's such respect for the reader in this artifact that is so lovely to look at, the quality of the paper, everything. So Trevor knows that was one of the very early conversations that I had, was about, I want the quality of this to be up there, because I think it shows respect for your reader, and that it invites the reader to enjoy the process of engaging with the text too. I've published many books, as you know, and many years ago worked for published with very big education publishers. And one of the things that made me want to work on with smaller publishers or my own or self-published was that they would often not care about that there were cute, if it was written for primary school teachers, there'd be cartoon elephants and kind of cute drawings that were patronizing and didn't show respect for the reader. So as well as just enjoying aesthetic and design, and Graham really helped elevate that for me, and then I didn't want to lose that again. He had a huge project on, so he wasn't able to design this book, but one of his colleagues did. So they drew on what the work that he'd done previously and tried to honor that in the way it was designed. And I think we've still achieved that, the space and the inclusion of examples, and Graham did do the cover, and you can't do that, can you? Anyway, there we go. Graham did do that, and I think that's gorgeous. So yeah, I have a lot of fun with the design of things.
Yeah, well, part 3, Kath, is super user friendly. I'm looking, it's funny, one of the, I think a great challenge is, and I'm sure you've heard this one before, is the younger students can't do A, B, or C. They're not able to plan for a concept focused inquiry or a big idea, or their language acquisition isn't there yet. And this particular graphic with the big ideas, my goodness, I just thought, I went through this and I wanted to plan a provocation for that. I wanted to invite my students into that. I just wanted to show it to them. I wanted to put it on the projector screen. And I just want you to talk about the design specifically of part 3, because you have this beautiful little logo, print, use, and reused on all these downloadables and these printables. Can you just talk to us about the design of part 3 specifically in the book?
Okay, so there's always, I'm going to fess up that I always have some tension within me around including templates or things that even look a little bit like a worksheet. I get really nervous about it because it's the opposite to what I do. I'm not a worksheet person at all. Yeah. On the other hand, I'm also really aware that you need to see what it can look like. So what I've tried to do there is provide, I guess templates is the right word, in that it's a template, it's an offering that you may just want to use the way that it is, or that it gives you an idea or gives your kids an idea for something that they can design and create themselves. So things like different one of the things about this work is that you can't get away from the fact that you can't just go, I think I might do this, off I go and do it. You have to, as a learner, you've got to map it out, and you've got to think about what you want to investigate, how you might go about it, what you bring to it, the resources you might need, how you're going to organize your thinking, who the audience might be for whatever it is you come to. So that scaffolding that with some templates. So rather than one template, I've shared half a dozen or more of possibilities, some that probably suit older students better, some that can suit very young students. And with our very young students, it's not so much templates for the children, but for the teachers, for record keeping and so on. So they are designed to I hope, give people ideas, make it manageable and accessible, and practical. I mean, at my heart, I remain a classroom teacher, so I hope haven't forgotten how important that accessibility and practicality is. Yeah.
Kath,
It certainly shows.
yeah,
Beautiful.
it really does. And I'm mindful of the time right now. The last question we wanted to ask you is the kind of impact you're hoping this book will have. And I'm wondering if you could share a couple thoughts on that before we toast you.
Well, of course, bottom line is, if through reading the book and playing with some of the ideas in it, more young people are given an opportunity to shine their light, to find their light, and more teachers are given an opportunity to see their students in new ways and value them for who they are and what they bring to their community, then I will be a happy author educator. So that would be what I would hope. I hope that it will. I've used a little phrase a couple of times in the book that comes from one of David Whyte's poems, and that is the idea of being half a shade braver. You know, if we're just half a shade braver to take that next step, to move not beyond, to not let go of shared journeys of inquiry, but to see opportunities for, in parallel to those shared journeys, for what children can do and the richness that is there. I mean, if I had $1 for every time a teacher I've worked with said to me, I cannot believe what my kids are doing. I never knew that that child was capable of this, or that kid never engaged, but in our iTime workshops, he is 100% on. You know, if more teachers could have that experience by just being half a shade braver, and more leaders gave that lovely permission to their teachers to offer this, then I would be really, really delighted. I dedicated this book to a true inquiry teacher from whom I learned so much by just being in her room for many years on and off, Michelle Martin, who died suddenly before I published this book. And I've dedicated it to her. What impact would I want? I would want her legacy, her passion, and her true heart as an educator to live on in some of the teachers and then their children who read the book. So I'd also want that. So we'll wait and see. And I'd love to hear from anyone, of course, if when you do get a chance to get it and use it, if if that little fire in your belly is burning a little brighter. I hope so.
Beautiful. Kath, congratulations on
Thank
behalf
you.
of me, Trevor, Chanel, and everyone who loves you
Raise
and
our water.
appreciates you, who is in with us virtually in real time or watching this later. Congratulations. I hereby launch Getting Personal with Inquiry Learning. Kath Murdoch,
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations,
Thank you,
friend.
Trevor, Kimberly. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm really humbled. And yeah, thank you so much. I hope you find it
Yes.
helpful. Thank you.
Well, we're not done yet. We're actually going to put the book out into the world right now. This is the beauty of the virtual event. So friends, this is amazing. So the book will be available on Amazon around the world in a few short days. Currently, there's one link in the world where you can find it. You can't even find it on Amazon if you search the title. You can all go try right now, but it won't come up. I'm going to throw a link in the chat. And for you all here, you'll be able to click the link if you'd like to purchase it now off Amazon.com. Now, if you're in different countries that use different Amazon affiliates, it will come to you shortly. So just stay tuned. It will populate in your local region. But this is really exciting, Kath. Are you ready for me to hit enter and have this book be out into the world?
And I also feel, Trevor, that I should acknowledge, and I should have done this earlier, Elevate Publishing, who I've co-published this book, and which is Trevor's company, have just been incredibly supportive and just beautiful to work with. I've worked with the big ones, and to work with a small nurturing company like Elevate has been fabulous. So thank you for all your support.
What an honor.
too.
Why, thank you. It's such a joy. And so let's do it. Can you say 3, 2, 1, Kath? And on your one, I'm going to hit enter.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. In the
There
chat it
you
goes.
go,
Oh my
friends.
God.
There you go. That is really exciting.
Congratulations, Kath.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And again, thanks, Kimberly and Trevor, and everyone for your time. And go and have a weekend now.
Congratulations. Bye, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Take care,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.